Great, thank you. All right, Dr. Scott, I'm going to give you the next one, and then we're going to we'll pass it down the line. But so the first question is, what exactly is a superfood? Can you I know that's kind of a buzzword today in nutrition. So what would you say is a superfood? And then what would be your pick of superfoods? And then we can go down the line and get back to Dr. Chevet.
Well, I think this is something great that the media has really publicized and brought to everybody's attention, but there is really no definition of what a superfood is. And I think that's important to understand, especially as we begin talking about what we eat and our overall food patterning. It's more about the whole rather than the individual parts. So to single out a certain food and say, well, blueberries are a superfood because they're really high in antioxidants, and people's eyes, just like yours, start glazing over when you start using words like antioxidants. And then the interpretation of the antioxidants. Well, did you use one testing methodology versus another? People are always going to be able to pick holes in them. So I would steer clear from the, quote, superfood, as it unfortunately just feeds into the media's craze and the feeding into all of the misinformation and confusion that's really out there. So my superfood would be a whole food, like a blueberry or a nut. That would be my superfood.
That's great, thank you.
Sure.
Do you have any idea what would be your? I mean, I like that idea. Instead of thinking of it as superfood, a whole food. And I think if everyone understands what we mean by whole food, so something that would not have been processed, to think of it as close to its natural form would be a whole food. So if we're talking those types of superfoods, what other types of foods would you categorize, put into that category?
If I had to pick one, I'd say salmon. Great tasting fish, healthy, has the omega-3 fatty acids. So I had to pick a superfood that is whole. My other one that I was going to suggest before you mentioned that was the super rich dark chocolate, with at least 70% cocoa, because that may not completely satisfy your sweet tooth, but it does have, I think, beneficial properties to it. I see someone shaking their head saying, no. But I actually feed this to my 3-year-old, and she loves it. And so when she's having a sweet tooth and is craving something chocolatey, I give her the dark cocoa chocolate.
I don't think I could come up with anything better than dark chocolate and blueberries.
Okay. I agree.
So my contribution to the superfood conversation is, I think that a superfood is any somewhat healthful food that you enjoy. I think it does not do much good for any of us to sit up here and espouse certain foods that you don't actually like. I remember I was working with a patient. She had been hearing Greek yogurt, it's all the rage, it's packed with protein, it's a great superfood. She was like, I hate Greek yogurt. I don't know what to do for breakfast. Everyone's just telling me Greek yogurt. I don't like it. I'm not going to eat it. So I think finding a food that is not processed, that is whole, as Dr. Scott said, that you enjoy, that becomes your very own superfood.
That's a great answer. I think a lot of people would probably pick chocolate, though, right? Okay. One last question that we'll take down the line, because I know we probably have a lot of parents in here. One of the common things we hear all the time is, my kid will not eat vegetables, right? They won't eat fruit. They won't eat vegetables. They only eat chicken nuggets, or they only eat macaroni and cheese, right? I get that I hear that all the time. I have found, for me personally, one of my tricks with my children is bringing ownership and fun into the process. So I'll take my daughter grocery shopping and tell her, we're going to pick a green vegetable today, and then we're going to find a creative way to cook it together. And when she has kind of that ownership and we also play a game with it, I find that she, is part of the process. So that has been worked in my family to get my kids to eat a little bit more vegetables. Do you have any other tips or tricks for kids?
Sure. So full disclosure, I do not have children, but I do have 2 nephews, and I do also work with children. So hopefully that gives me a little bit of credibility. One piece of advice that I would have is really avoid using food bribery. And I see that all the time of, if you have a few bites of broccoli, then you can have your pudding for dessert. If you have just a few carrots, then you can have a popsicle. And that creates this relationship with food very early on that we see being perpetuated up through adolescence and adulthood, wherein certain foods are demonized and they're kind of viewed as punitive, and then certain foods become very rewarding. So we actually see from a lot of longitudinal research that using that sort of food bribery, and again, I'm not a parent, so I can't imagine how tough it must be to try to get a picky child to eat vegetables. But if there are ways of avoiding saying things like, you can have your dessert once you eat that, that's sort of my one big piece of advice about that topic.
That's a good one.
One of the things that I suggest is having children grow things. If they grow it or they help grow food, they're more likely to eat it. And also cooking as well, getting them involved in prepping food, prepping and cooking. Children as young as 2 can help with washing fruits and vegetables and helping put food on the table. And the data does show that if children are involved in growing and preparing the food, they are more likely to eat it.
So when I worked with pediatrics, when I was doing clinical nutrition, I did not have children. And I used the standard advice to work with children who are picky eaters. Now I am a mom. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and now I have a completely different perspective on things. So speaking about like growing food, I'll tell a little story about my daughter. She helped me plant some cherry tomato plants this summer. And as the plants began to grow, she was fascinated watching the blooms turn into little tomatoes, and then the tomatoes were green, and she knew I can't pick them yet. And when they turned red, she would gobble them up faster than I could collect them for our salad for dinner. She would go out there and just eat them. When I took her to the grocery store and showed her the same exact cherry tomatoes in a package, she says, "Ooh, I don't like those." Right? So I'm like, you have to sometimes think like a 3-year-old. I'm like, okay, these are the exact same things you grew and that you were eating like candy over the summer. Now you're telling me you don't like them. And once I explained that these were the same things, she kind of understood. But one bit of advice, and something I try to do now personally, is to respect the likes and dislikes of your children. Nobody in this room likes every vegetable that's ever grown. I can't stand okra. I mean, why you would want to eat something slimy is beyond me, right? So I don't care how healthy it is. If it becomes a superfood one day, it's not going in this body, ugh, right? But I'm an adult, right? So I know I don't have to eat okra. There's other things I can eat. And I think it's very important to respect your children's likes and dislikes. There are things probably that your children loves in the vegetable category. If they happen to love carrots and you feed carrots to them almost every day, that's better than nothing. So I think it's real important to respect that with your children. Obviously, there's some limits to that because children are very clever. And once they get tuned into that, they might say that, I just don't like anything, Mommy, so therefore I don't have to eat vegetables, right? One other example, when I was a child, I didn't like vegetables that were cooked because once they were cooked, the texture changed, and it was really the texture that I did not like. I would eat the same exact vegetables raw, but I didn't like them when my mother boiled them in a pot of water and made them all mushy. So finally, I was able to convey that to my mother when I was probably about 6 or 7 years old, and she started separating my vegetables so that they were crispy and crunchy, and I would eat them. Cook them? No way. Raw? Thumbs up. So I think sometimes it's just getting tuned in to your children, kind of trying to think like a 3-year-old or a 6-year-old and honoring their likes and dislikes.
I'm not a parent yet, so I won't try to pretend to tell parents how they need to do their job. But I do find that with my 4 nieces, as everyone has said, getting them involved is certainly very helpful, and presenting things in ways that are fun to kids too, whether it's a pattern on their plate or different combinations of food that's very visually appealing to them. We know that we eat with our eyes. If that piece of broccoli looks limp and not green, that off brown color, if we're snubbing our nose at it, our kids aren't certainly going to do it. And we also find too, when we have our 4 nieces, that modeling also helps as well. So if we have on our plates those same foods and we're eating them, they seem to be more likely to try them. Now, whether or not they're just trying to be on good behavior because there's some reward on the back end from them, if we tell their mom and dad that they behaved, that may be the case, but that's at least what we found has been helpful for us.
So a lot of the tips that I give for children have already been provided. I have 5 nieces and nephews, 5 and under, so this is like that phase of life that's really, you can have a huge impact on the way they eat. And it's funny because anytime I call them or FaceTime with them, they're so excited to talk to me about food, so clearly the dietitian aunt has worn off. But I think, one of the big things I've seen is just making food fun, whether it's growing it, cooking it, etc. And I was going to mention modeling, and of course, that's what happens when you're at the end. Everything's has been mentioned, but just to stem, like combining being a role model, but also the making it fun factor. Figuring out what works for each kid. My one nephew loves to be fast. He loves race cars and Lightning McQueen and this and that. So therefore, we tell him, and there's smidgen white lies. Clearly, if he eats the carrots, he's not going to be faster that afternoon, but he thinks that. So it's like, well, these superheroes, they eat their fruits and vegetables, so then he gobbles them up. And, for my nieces, it's like they love long Rapunzel hair. So we tell them if they get their good nutrition, they're going to have that really long hair. And they're very excited about it, So I think figuring out what works for them to get them excited about the food that they're eating, whether it's different colors on the plate. I always make funny faces with the foods with the kids. So whether it's like, you can make eyes with eggs and then, a mouth that's like all the veggies or something. So I think that, just making it fun and getting them involved. And for each kid, that might be different. Maybe one kid's really excited to be in the dirt and plant stuff, but not excited to be in the kitchen. But another kid might be excited to be in the kitchen and not dirty. So I think just really making it fun and figuring out what works for each individual kid.
That's great tips. All right, at this time, I'd like to open up for additional questions from the audience. If you have a question for one of our panelists, please raise your hand and a microphone will be brought to you. As a reminder, please speak clearly into the microphone as this event is being broadcast throughout DLA. I think there's a question back there. Yep.
Wait, there you go. So if weight is not the only index, right? What are some other ones that are accessible to people on a regular basis to get feedback that you'd recommend? Heart rate, like blood pressure, seem to be the ones that we can get here in the building, but
Yeah,
any
I
tips?
mean, I did weight management research for a long time, and we would have people that were frustrated that they didn't meet their goal weight, and we would always encourage them, just how do your clothes fit? How are you sleeping? What's your energy like? These are things you don't even need a machine or equipment to get that feedback. And then there's also certain things that might require another step, such as blood pressure or whatnot. And, I've always encouraged, it depends for the person what they're most excited about. I've had patients that were on 10 medications, and after losing some weight, they were on 5. I mean, that's whatever means a lot to you in terms of your indicators of health, there's many of them. It's not just the scale.
Anyone else have?
I would add as well, just, are you able to do the activities that you enjoy? When I look at the gambit of, age groups that I've dealt with, a lot of times you don't see people until suddenly, they can't go on that hike that they used to enjoy doing. They can no longer, carry their grandchildren up the steps. So they start to realize there's something, not right here. So I think looking at the activities that you enjoy, and are you still able to do those things that make you happy?
Yeah, I have a question. I like to eat oatmeal in the morning, and as most of us know, Dr. Oz really keeps throwing out steel-cut oatmeal. What is the real difference? Because I find it much more difficult to prepare than regular oatmeal. So nutritionally, what is the real difference, and is it worth going with steel-cut oatmeal?
I can certainly appreciate the time factor that it takes to prepare steel-cut oat. I'll give you a quick, simple recipe. So I take 1 part steel-cut oats, 1 part rolled oats, 1 part plain Greek yogurt to 2 parts soy milk. You can use regular milk if you want to also. Mix it all up in a container, let it sit overnight. Overnight, it's going to absorb all the liquid and be ready for you in the morning. If you choose to then microwave it because you want to eat it warm, fine. If you want to take it cold to bring it into work because you're running out the door, fine, done. To go back to your question, though, the big difference all has to do in the processing of it. So you start off with the whole oat groat. It looks, I'm trying to think of how it describes. If we've seen a wheat kernel, almost like a popcorn kernel, maybe we think about it that way, and we've cut it in half or in thirds, that's now our steel cut oat. Our rolled oat then, as the name implies, it's been rolled over, so now it's flat. So there's a greater surface area for that liquid to absorb, so it cooks really quick. Then even with your quick cook oats, they've been partially cooked already. So that's why they can, be cooked in 30 seconds in their microwave. Is there a huge difference between them? Not necessarily. Certainly your steel cut oats, because they're very small, from a volume standpoint, a quarter cup of those steel cut oats has the same calories as a half a cup of the rolled oats. So therefore, the fiber may be a little bit different, but in general, I think you're splitting hairs. That's my opinion. But if you're looking to incorporate it, that easy overnight oat recipe is a great way to get it. And that way, then in the morning, you can top it with fresh fruit if you want to, or frozen fruit if you have that in the freezer. Maybe you throw a spoonful of peanut butter or almond butter on top too if you want it to be a little bit more satiating, and really you'll find that it keeps you satisfied throughout the morning.
Great, and I'll add to tie back into our food labeling discussion. There are, if anyone does like Pinterest, sometimes you can find some really innovative and creative like overnight oatmeal recipes. So like Dr. Scott said in the morning, just read the ingredients and the label, because sometimes it's fun to Google those things, but there may be a lot of sugar, different products that have additives that they're gonna ask you to put in there. So just watch the ingredient list as well. Do we have any other questions? A couple down here in the front and one on the side.
I have two questions. The first one is dealing with the USDA. And I know we had the food pyramid, the steps, and everything else. But can you tell me, because I know that other countries also have their own dietary guidelines, does the U.S. Use other countries to help within those guidelines? Because I know some have different sources that they use and different ways of thinking, but do they take those in consideration? And then my second question is, what are your thoughts with cooked and raw/live foods? I know the nutritional values and different things of that nature, but do you think that there should be more of a percentage based on how much you should eat regards to the cooked vegetables, fruits, or whatever, in comparison to the live and or raw fruits and vegetables?
As far as the dietary guidelines, of course, we're aware of what other countries have for their dietary guidelines, but one thing to consider is they might not use the same process as us. We base our guidelines on nutrition science that's generalizable to the American public, and so there's different cultural differences in terms of food preferences. Different diseases impact certain countries differently. So of course we're aware of them, but we don't base ours on theirs. We base ours on what's going to be most relevant for the U.S. population. And so there's different considerations. But I'll let someone else answer about the, I could, but I'll.
Maybe we'll have Ms. Hawkins or Ms. Walker answer the question on the raw, what percentage of raw food? I know that you're probably talking about like the raw food movement that kind of says 50% of your food should be raw, so that you get all the enzymes.
Again, I'm going to come back to trying to tell somebody that you should eat more raw foods than cooked foods, or more cooked foods than raw foods. Really what it comes down to is, what are your typical eating patterns? What are your eating behaviors now? And so as a dietitian, I would work with the person individually to find out what they currently eat and then make recommendations based on that. There's a lot out in the media that says that a raw food diet is the way to go. It's supposed to be healthier for you because you're getting, none of the fiber is broken down. You're going to make sure that you get more of the nutrients. However, we also know that cooking helps to the enzymatic processes that need to take place in some of the vegetables in order for your body to be able to absorb some of those nutrients. So really, what do you normally eat? And then looking at that and going, you could say 50-50, you could say 25-75, 25% raw, 75% cooked. But really, it comes down to what is a typical day like for you? I mean, what are you eating at breakfast? What are you eating at lunch? What are you eating at dinner? For me to sit here and tell you, go out and start eating all raw foods, that would not be realistic, and it would not meet your life. Changing behavior is is something that takes time. And if you're just eating fruits and vegetables, as a dietitian, I'm happy.
Do we have any other questions in the audience? I think we had two in the front and one in the middle. Okay.
Good morning, and thank you for taking time to talk with us this morning. My question is, my wife has celiac disease, and as a result, she largely eats a whole food diet, tries to stay away from the grains and flour and so forth. But a concern she always has, and her physician has, is that she's not getting the nutrients that she needs because of what she's eliminated from her diet in order to manage the celiac. And as soon as she starts eating the stuff that she eliminates, the symptoms of celiac, like headaches and stomach distress, come back. So my question is, my wife is a middle-aged woman who has celiac and is eating a largely whole food diet but eliminating certain things, how can she best ensure that she's getting the nutrients that she needs in her diet?
Yeah, I'm not sure any of us are celiac experts up here, but that's a great comment that you bring up. And in that case, I would encourage you to look for those foods that are gluten-free and some of the foods that are naturally gluten-free. For example, what comes to my mind is grain quinoa, gluten-free. There's several others down that path that are as well that will help to replace some of those nutrients that she may be missing by eliminating a lot of the wheat, rye, barley, flours, food derivatives thereof from her diet. And to note now too, Dr. Pasoda, correct me if I'm wrong, there is a standard definition of what gluten-free means if it's on a package, that it's below a certain parts per million level of the gluten that's in there. So you can be certain if it says gluten-free that pending she doesn't have an ultra sensitivity to it, that it should really bode well for her. And potentially then considering too, not necessarily one to push supplementation, but if supplementation is necessary in this case, i.e. a multivitamin mineral supplement, then that's something she could consider. And if she does, then there would be further on recommendations that it would make as far as if you are buying a multi-mineral vitamin supplement, things to look for on a label. But otherwise, I would go back to if she's into that whole food approach, explore some of the different gluten-free options that are out there. And I know Whole Foods gets a bad rap and we call it whole paycheck, but truly they have a very large bulk section there, and it can be a good place to try things in very small quantities to see if you like them. If she tries quinoa and says, no way, okay, make it your way down the list to the next grain. And many different flours that are available, whether it's an almond meal or an almond flour, chickpea flour, things that are available and on the market. And as Lieutenant Colonel McCauley brought to our attention, Pinterest and some of these different kind of social media websites that have a lot of good ideas and recipes and ways of making those comparable or parallel foods that we used to eat but now are no longer able to.
If you catch me after, oh, did you have something? Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say
Dr.
one other quick additional comment is that I know for those of us that are in the field, some of these things might seem, it's just our training, so we know what these gluten-free, naturally gluten-free foods are. And I would encourage, I know there's a few of us who are dietitians, that maybe even a one session with a dietitian, your wife might be able to get a list of those foods, and then she can go to the step of trying them. Since there's not, there's a lot of mixed messages in the media, she might just, not need to invest a lot of money, but a dietitian is definitely going to be an expert, and there's lots of dietitians now, because of the increased awareness, specializing in celiac disease.
That's a great point. That's almost exactly what I was going to say. I was saying, catch me after. I think it's more important to look at what is it that your wife is eating to understand exactly what she's missing also, because some of those can be, some of the nutrients can be filled in other areas. I think we have time for one more question. Sir, did you want to take it? And then we're going to have to finish for the day.
Okay, quick question. So this question has no calories whatsoever. I feel like I've lost the water wars in my household. So my children will no longer drink water out of a faucet. So they have to drink bottled water. And should I just give up and go down the aisle, pay for the bottled water, or you got any hints other than Ant-Man doesn't drink bottled water to win that? Or is potentially the faucet water unsafe?
We deal with this a lot in the federal government. There's a lot of efforts across agencies to be more sustainable. And you've all seen those commercials where they say, the plastic water bottles, go around the earth, 22 times or something like that. And the fact is our water, maybe not Flint, Michigan, but generally our water is very, very safe. I work in the District of Columbia, though, that has a horrible reputation. Everyone thinks the water down there is like going to kill you. Probably because GSA at one point in time put up placards in front of their fountains that said, "Do not drink." That was because of lead pipes, which have since been replaced. But the municipal water supply in the District of Columbia is completely safe. It doesn't taste bad. But there is this perception that bottled water is healthier. And there may be people out there who just simply prefer the taste of Deer Park over something that they can get out of their tap. And I don't know if that is necessarily your children's issue, or maybe they just like carrying the water bottle around. One thing I do with my daughter, we refill her water bottle out of the refrigerator little spout. And so, she carries around her little water bottle, but it's still coming from the tap. So I don't know how old your children are, but maybe you could hoodwink them maybe and, cut down on the number of bottled waters. But the other thing, recently I spoke to my dentist, and she said that actually there's a growing concern about children not, and I know this is controversial, but the exposure to fluoride and the hardening of their teeth, and how the dentist industry is starting to see an upswing in the number of cavities in children as they start to drink more bottled water and they're not being exposed to the fluoride, which was primarily put in the water supply to help harden children's teeth. So there's definitely arguments on both sides, but I think perception in terms of the safety of water is paramount. And at GSA, we're actually going to be doing a campaign to advertise the fact that we have drinking fountains and we have really good tasting water. The other thing you can see that helps in facilities is having refilling stations on your water fountains. So, if you have the opportunity to encourage your building in any way, putting in a standard water fountain is okay, but a lot of people are also concerned about putting their mouth too close to the spigot, even though we know from a public health standpoint there's no risk. But if you have the drinking fountains that have the refillable, so the spout, you see it in the airports a lot, you can refill your bottles. And maybe that's a better solution. Get them a really cool, flashing light, superhero logo water bottle and just fill it up and maybe you can get around that.
I think that's a great tip. They also have the water filters that you put right on your faucet, too. I know we use those at our house, so maybe one of those tricks will work for you, sir. All right, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for questions, so thank you to everybody in the audience. We will now turn the event back over to our Mistress of Ceremonies, Miss Bethany Sweatman.
Well, before we conclude here today, I just want to take a little time to present a small token of our appreciation to our participants. I think we can all agree they did a fantastic job and shared some really great information. At this time, I would like to invite Dr. Roman back to the stage so we can present a small award. When I call your name, I'll just have you step right up here to accept your award from Dr. Roman. Pause for a quick picture, and then you can take your seat again. Okay? We'll start with Dr. Natasha Chevet. Karen Hawkins. Miss Melissa Walker. Dr. Jonathan Scott. And Dr. Tricia Pasota. and our panel moderator, Lieutenant Colonel Janelle McCauley. Let's give all of these guys one more warm applause. Thank you all so much for coming, and that concludes our presentation for today.